Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today I want to talk about your spam filter because your spam filter has a political bias, especially if you're using Google, Outlook, or Gmail. And here's what's going on. Now, obviously, this seems to be unintentional. I found this to be super interesting, though, and as always, when I'm talking about something like this, in terms of the political spectrum, I have to basically throw in my disclaimer here in the sense that I am basically not throwing stones at any political side. We're obviously very divided. I am just trying to tell you what this study found. You can take what you want from it. And I always like to say that cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're definitely not immune from it. And I also apologize. I'm a little under the weather today, just not feeling so hot. But I want to bring you this because I found this to be a very interesting read. And so let's get to this. Now, this is coming from the North Carolina State University's Department of Computer Science, who published an article, or I should say a study, basically entitled, and I quote, "A Peek into the Political Biases in Email Spam Filtering Algorithms During U.S. Election 2020." Now, this was published last week. Now, this study was conducted by Hassan Iqbal, Usman Mahmood Khan, Hassan Ali Khan, and Muhammad Shahzad. Now, basically, what they did was, in order to determine if spam filtering algorithms, I can't speak today, or SFAs, are biased towards a particular political party or ideology, they put it through a series of tests. Now, this study took place over the course of 5 months from July 1st of 2020 to November 30th of 2020 on Gmail, Outlook, and Yahoo, as I mentioned. Now, here's what they did. They created 102 email accounts and subscribed to 2 presidential, 78 Senate, and 156 House candidates, obviously all federal elections. And here's what they wrote in terms of their methodology. And I quote, "To accurately estimate the political biases and mitigate any potential effects of demographics, ethnicity, age, and gender, we created multiple email accounts with different combinations of demographic factors and designed 2 experiments. The first experiment studies the general trends of biases in SFAs across the email services for the presidential, Senate, and House candidates. The second experiment studies the impact of different email interactions, such as reading the emails, marking them as spam, or vice versa on the biases in SFAs, again, spam filtering algorithms. We designed an automated process to perform all the subscriptions and took periodic backups to keep all the email accounts active, as well as to keep track of the correct number of spam emails received over the course of data collection for each of these 3 services." Now, their results are really interesting. And I did find this seriously interesting. So again, I'm just going to quote directly from them. Again, this is from the study, so take what you will from this. I obviously have my own opinions, which I will be sharing after this analysis. And I quote, "We made several important observations in our study. For example, as an aggregate trend, Gmail leaned towards the left, while Outlook and Yahoo leaned towards the right. Yahoo retained about half of all political emails in inbox, up to 55.2% marked as spam, while Outlook filtered out the vast majority of emails, over 71.8% from all political candidates, and marked them as spam. Gmail retained the majority of left-wing candidates' email in the inbox, that's less than 10.12% marked as spam, while it sent the majority of right-wing candidates' emails to the spam folder, up to 77.2% marked as spam." And I have a lot of basically thoughts about the next quote from this study. Again, I'm going directly from the report here because you need to hear this directly before I go into my opinion. And I quote again, "The percentage of emails marked by Gmail as spam from the right-wing candidates grew steadily as the election date approached, while the percentage of emails marked as spam from the left-wing candidates remained about the same." Google responded to this basically via an inquiry by Fox News, who was the first one to publish this, obviously, and that's basically where it got picked up, and this is where I found this interesting. But here is Google's response to this report, and I quote directly, "Political affiliation has absolutely no bearing on mail classifications in Gmail, and we've debunked this suggestion, which has surfaced periodically from across the political spectrum for many years. Mail classifications in Gmail automatically adjust to match Gmail users' preferences and actions. Gmail users can move messages to spam or to any other category. Gmail automatically adjusts the classifications of particular emails according to these user actions. Now, the researchers noted basically that they have studied SFAs in the past and have identified 5 types of features that appear to influence the decisions of SFAs, including the metadata about email content, the actual content of the email, the reaction of the recipient, meaning what did the recipient do, delete it, mark it as spam, etc., the attributes of the sender, as most spam filters do check the sender to validate that they are an actual legitimate sender and not, let's say, a cyber criminal, and also the demographics of the recipient. If you recall, they set up 100-odd mailboxes using various demographics from across the demographic spectrum, on age, gender, race, etc. And I quote the study again. The spam filtering algorithms in the widely used email services of today, such as Gmail, Outlook, and Yahoo, do not provide any transparency on their internal workings. Given the lack of this transparency, an important question to study is whether these SFAs hold any biases towards certain political affiliations. This question is motivated by the growing body of evidence suggested that biases in online algorithms can influence undecided voters. For example, Epstein et al., another study showed that the bias in search rankings can shift the voting preferences of undecided voters by as much as 20% without those voters being aware of the manipulation. And one last quote before I dive in here, because I've got a ton of thoughts on this. Now, I quote them again. While we have no reason to believe that there was deliberate attempts from the email services to create these biases to influence voters, the fact remains that their SFAs have learned to mark more emails from one political affiliation as spam compared to the other. Again, remembering that one favored left, 2 favored right, those kinds of things. As these prominent email services are actively used by a sizable chunk of the voting population, and as many of the voters today rely on the information they see or don't see online, such biases may have an unignorable impact on the outcomes of an election. And I think that is actually a really good statement to make, in the sense that if you are only seeing essentially what your filter bubble gives you, meaning, let's say you're on the right, you're going to see a lot of Fox News, you're going to see a lot of OAN, like those kinds of sources. And if you're on the left, you're going to see a lot of MSNBC, Daily Kos, etc. That's the standard search bubbles. But it also comes down to spam filtering as well. Now, to their point, I don't think that there's necessarily a driven political bias here, because the one thing I'm not hearing in this report is how the spam filters are potentially basically leveling out things or understanding things like extremism and then blocking it. So I can go in, for example, on an aside, into a firewall's web filtering setup or a DNS filtering agent and say, block extremism. And we have seen some basically political candidates all across the ideological spectrum use extremist words in some way, shape, or form that may have an impact on this study. And so I'd be very curious to see essentially what that is. We've seen a slew of basically commercials and all these kinds of things of candidates basically being like, well, I'm going to take down the other side. And then, essentially they're shooting firearms and stuff in their commercials. That could be flagged by an artificial intelligence as some kind of extremism, even if it's not. And so I'm curious to understand those things. It's also interesting to note that per Google, essentially what they are doing, which is slightly different than a lot of the others, is they are taking the user behavior into account to adjust the AI for that user's mailbox to what they're doing. So for example, let's say I'm on the left and I'm getting, emails from, let's say, Republican candidates, for example, here in the United States. I might be marking those as spam, or vice versa. Maybe I'm on the right and I'm getting emails from left-wing candidates and I'm marking those as spam, for whatever reason, and maybe that is shifting Google's count. Obviously the problem that we have here is that people are immediately going to jump to, it's a conspiracy in one way, shape, or the other. And I could basically foresee one political side glomming onto Google, the other side glomming onto Yahoo and Outlook as proof that big tech is good, bad, or ugly, whatever you want to say. But the point is that we don't have any concrete proof beyond letting their algorithms do what they do. Spam is always going to check for spam. And it's not just validating that the senders are correct, it's validating that the content is also correct as well. That's why so many fake mortgage, fake Viagra, fake all of these emails, re-upping your car's extended warranty get stuck into the spam filters. And so I'm also wondering if there's a specific bias in terms of keywords or nomenclature used by either the right or the left that is basically being tripped up by the AI, and the AI is saying, oh, this to me feels more spam than it actually feels normal, and so it's flagging it as spam by virtue of that. I think there's an absolute ton of variables here, but the one thing that you can't deny is that whatever the algorithms are or however they're programmed, they are basically exhibiting some kind of bias here. And at the end of the day, that can be troubling, especially during a political campaign. I mean, think about this. Let's say you're trying to unseat that incumbent. You want to get your information out there, even to that incumbent's voters or supporters, because maybe you've got a platform that will siphon off some of those votes and get you elected, or vice versa. And so I think it's so important to have basically an unbiased source, an unbiased understanding, and get out of those filter bubbles. If you're on the right, read left-wing sources. If you're on the left, read right-wing sources. Understand the world around you. Understand the reporting. I think that's just so unbelievably important, and we should not be the first to throw stones. We should be the first to understand, especially if we want a basically good and cohesive society where we all get along, which doesn't seem to be the case lately. So this is interesting. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I'm waiting for the, oh my God, everything is biased on one side or the other, Nick, you're an idiot kind of thing. So feel free to have at it. But I thought this was absolutely fascinating, absolutely interesting. Your spam filter has a political bias. It may be unintentional, but it does seem to be there. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.